Alright. What's up, everyone? This is Mr.Cody with another video for Intro to Art. So last couple of weeks we've been talking about simple shapes, drawing with pen, and all that fancy stuff. This week we are not going to be drawing with pen, but I'm going to show you why pen, not only why we were using the pen to begin with, but also I'm going to now introduce you to something called perspective. So perspective, as I can explain in my best of my words, is what makes a drawing look three-dimensional. So the tools I'm going to be using today is a regular old pencil. I'm going to have an eraser with that pencil. I'm going to have a Sharpie, and I'm going to be using a ruler. For this video, 1-point perspective. This is where you're going to have one focal point in your line. So what you want to do first is draw your horizon line, because what we're going to do is we're going to continue our tree demonstration that I showed you last class. We're going to continue that. Simple shapes, easy to get a hang of. First, you want to draw your horizon line. That's basically a fancy word for your sky and your land meet. So I'm going to draw mine a little bit high so I have more road for where my trees are going to kind of sit. Alright, so that's my line. Next, you want to draw a point on this horizon line where you want the point of perspective to start from. So for me, I want to start it somewhere in the middle. I'm going to draw the line a lot darker than you typically would so you can see what I'm doing. So now that I drew my horizon line with my point of perspective, what I want to do next is now lay out the guidelines for not only my road, but the grassy area that's going to separate the trees from my road. So all you would have to do is basically draw all your guidelines starting or ending from your point of perspective, depending on the side of the line you're drawing on. Depends on if your ruler has to be angled downwards or upwards. So for the road, how wide you make it is up to you, but I'm just going to kind of draw my first line to the left starting from here, and my second line to the right going here. Now, since we're doing something as abstract as like nature, you don't have to really be too exact with it, but if you want to do buildings, that's when you want to try to be more equal with the lines you create. But since this is kind of just nature, we don't really have to worry about that too much. Now, one of the things I should point out to you, but since this is practice, you don't really have to worry about it too much. The reason why I had you start with pen first is now when you're using the pencil, drawing lightly is going to be way easier to do with a pencil than it is with a pen. So you're going to find that you can create super duper light lines when you're creating things like this, because when you're doing guidelines for any drawing, you want to draw your guidelines really light. So not only is it easier to erase, but it won't indent the paper. So even after the pencil marks are gone, it won't have any indents in the paper to where if you color it, it makes it harder to color. So just keep those things in mind while you're doing this. But since it's practice, you don't really have to worry too much. So now that I have my road mapped out, which is this first set of lines here, next I'm going to kind of set up the guidelines for where my trees are going to start. How close to the road you make your trees, again, that is up to you. I'm going to give mine a little bit of space though. Just draw those lines. Like I said, I'm drawing them darker just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So my road, have my grass area, and this is where my trees are going to start. Next, where the top of my trees are going to end. Just because you have your guidelines here, don't think you have to stop all your marks exactly at your guideline. You can either pass it a little bit or go a little bit under it. Since you are doing something like nature, like I said, you have some room to mess around and not be as exact with it. So feel free to just experiment. This is only practice, so you don't have to worry about being too exact with any of these lines. So I'm just going to draw the top of my trees going upwards. So a couple of things I want to point out. All the lines that I drew underneath my horizon line has the diagonal line going upwards towards my point of perspective. Anything above this horizon line is pointing downwards toward my point of perspective. Now here's where we start to create some depth in our image. You know, trees typically, most times, 9 times out of 10, grow upwards or straight up. You find that palm trees sometimes grow a little lopsided, or some trees in general grow a little lopsided, but typically they're going straight up. So since we're keeping it simple, we're going to do the same thing. So we are now going to start to draw lines just like this, not too detailed just yet. We're going to draw vertical, or not vertical, excuse me. Yep, I was right. Vertical lines going between where we want, the line where we want our trees to start and where it wants to end. One thing to keep in mind, you're going to notice anything closest to you. This is another thing that helps with perspective. Any object closest to you is going to be bigger than the objects further away from you. So be mindful of that when you are drawing things like perspective. Keep in mind things that actually happen in real life. So that's how it's easier to draw more realistic pictures. You want to apply some sort of logic to your drawings. Unless you want to just create your own world, and that's when you can kind of throw some of these logical things out the window. But if you want to draw something from life, you want to keep in mind some of the logical things that happen. So we have our vertical lines here, and not only will the objects closest to you be bigger, but you'll find that they'll be more spaced out, and the further down the line you go, they're going to be closer together. So here's where segmenting a line, like I talked about before, is going to be helpful. So you're going to notice I'm going to draw these lines a little bit closer. They're evenly spaced, for lack of a better term, but they're still, there. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other side really quick. Like I said, this is nature. You don't have to be too exact with your measurements. Boom. I'm not doing too many trees. You can do more, you can do less. All right. So now, couple things I'm going to point out. Like I said, more space to this between the lines closest to me, and closer together with the lines further away. Now that we have guidelines for our trees, our road, and the grass area we have, here's where we're going to start to add in some of our tree shapes. Just like the last exercise we did with the pen and drawing a tree with simple shapes, I'm going to do my trees the exact same way. I'm not going to add too many details in it just now. I'm just going to do my little rectangle and circle on top. You can challenge yourself to do more detailed drawings. I always encourage it, but for now, just to get used to what we're doing, I'm going to keep it simple. So now that we have our guidelines for our trees, we know that the biggest tree is going to be first. I'm just going to kind of draw a simple rectangular shape. You can continue to use the ruler if you like, but I'm just going to kind of draw with my hand now. And to give it a little bit more depth, I'm going to give this tree an oval shape, or not oval shape, a cylinder shape, because that's how trees kind of fall in. And I'm going to have the top of the tree just be a little circle. Right, and like I said, it doesn't really have to fall inside of the line that you draw. You can kind of sit above it or below it. But for me, I'm just going to keep it real simple. Keeping loose, sketchy lines. I'm not being too refined with it, but I am being light. Next, I'm going to draw my other trees. Keeping it loose, drawing around these vertical lines I've drawn, just to create some depth in my drawing. Alright. And creating overlapping with your trees also helps with perspective and creating depth in your pieces. So I'm just going to draw those, creating like my rectangular shape, giving rounded cylindery bottoms, if that's the word I'm looking for. Alright, and you also want to keep the ones further in the background typically lighter than the ones in the foreground. So background is anything in the back, foreground is everything up front, if you did not know that. Excuse me. So for now, I'm going to leave everything on the right side as like the example of your guidelines, and everything on the left side is going to be the detailed portion of it all. So I'm going to move this camera up a little bit so you can see more of the top. There you go. Moved it up some. So it's a little bit easier to see. So like I was saying, this side is going to be my guideline side. So all it's going to have is the guidelines. Left side is going to be the detailed portion of it all. So here's where drawing lightly will come into play. To clean up some of this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to erase some of the guidelines inside of the trees. Depending on how light you drew will depend on how easy it is to erase all the guidelines inside of your tree shape here. Alright, you can erase either before or after you ink it, or trace it with your marker or pen, whatever you're using to trace it, because you can use a pen to trace these two, but I drew kind of light or dark I mean, so drawing my guidelines are going to be a little bit harder to erase, but it's okay. Boom. So now, since I drew lightly, here's where tracing it in. Now that I have these simple shapes, here's what I can start adding in some more of those looser kind of lines that I showed you in the other experiences. And here's where it's kind of like a test from drawing from your head, kind of imagining a tree, how it would look in real life, and just kind of going with that. When I draw a tree, I'm not going to say I start with the trunk first or the actual top of the tree first. It just kind of depends on how I feel. In this particular case, I kind of want to start with the actual top of the tree first, but starting with the trunk may be easier for you. I said try both approaches. Just keep in mind, the tree in the front will not only be the biggest tree in front of you, but also typically be the tree with the most detail. So it's going to be most detailed here, and the further back you go, it's going to be less detailed. Drop my marker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw like real loose, squiggly kind of lines just to emulate a tree shape. Some of my lines aren't even connected. I just want it to feel real loose, tree-like. Alright. Also add maybe some little squiggles in the tree itself. As you can see, like being simple, but still letting you know what it is. Now the tree trunk, create a little angle to it, give it a little curve. Like I'm saying, trying to draw with one fluid motion. The base of the tree you can draw similar to the actual leaves of the tree, not completely connected. So if you wanted to, when we get to adding grass, I can show you that. If you want to add like tree trunk details, kind of like the wood grain, you can. They're just kind of wiggles being squiggled in. So you just want to keep this simple for now. It's just to give you perspective. You can do the same thing with the next tree, just like I said, a little bit less detail. All right, same wiggle and squiggle. Also the same tree trunk. Also the same scatter thingy. You can put some detail in this for the tree. Not as much though, because like I said, it's not as close. This one you can pretty much get super fancy with if you wanted to. Next, tree back here. All the trees don't even have to be the same size. I just did that just, it's easier to demonstrate. Putting some detail in the tree here. There. Alright. Getting more or less and less detail, I should say. But you can still kind of get gist of what's going on. What we have now is simple trees, kind of like a three-dimensional plane. And as you can see, they all kind of gradually go towards our point of perspective. Now if we start to add little details like grass, if I want to keep it simple, I just draw like a couple of lines being flicked, like 3 lines being flicked with the pen, brush, marker, whatever your drawing tool is. And I kind of just add those randomly in a couple of places. This also helps to create a little bit of depth. Keeping it random, spacing them out. Like I said, the further you go, the less likely you would even see those, but if you did want to put it all the way down, just don't keep it as detailed. I also like to throw them at the base of a tree. Alright, boom. In theory, would probably have some back here too. All that fancy stuff. If you wanted to, you can also add maybe some shading to your trees in the backdrop, making them a little bit shaded or shadowed, I should say. You can do that if you wanted to. Maybe if you don't add it to the whole thing, you just add it to wherever it overlaps. Maybe at the trunk itself. Alright, and you can still see I'm using hatching to do so. Hatching can be a little intimidating with something like a Sharpie, but I find for art, doing things that intimidate you ultimately makes you better in the end. Keeping it super simple. I'm not worrying about all the details just yet, because I find that the fundamentals make even simplistic drawings look realistic. So as you can see, just these little lessons here, right? A little quick explanation if you're wondering how you determine where you shadow something. You want to focus on your light source. So the way the shadowing is on my drawing, all the trees on the left side of them are shadowed. That would either imply that this light is either A, on the right side of my tree, or B, kind of to above it, but we can't really see that based on this side not having anything. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to draw in the other side just using the marker. I'm not going to worry too much about like making it super perfect, but I'm going to draw the other side in so you can really get a full taste of how 1-point perspective can give you a nice 3-dimensional drawing. Okay, so as you can see, I kept the drawing really simple, but you can still get the gist of how 1-point perspective can help give you more of a 3-dimensional feel to your drawings. And I use something simple like trees. As you can see, I didn't put crazy detail in it. They kind of look like broccolis. I really like broccoli, but I know a lot of people don't, but it's cool. Mini trees are delicious. So yeah, kept the drawing simple, but you can still see it has a nice 3-dimensional look. Also left the guidelines on there. Excuse me. I left the guidelines on there so you see how everything kind of lays on top of it. This is 1-point perspective. They have 2-point perspective as well, which I'm also going to cover with you in our next video. But play around with this, practice this, and if you want to try 2-point perspective before you see my lesson on it, go ahead and try it. But try it without looking at any videos first and see how well you do. And then we'll go from there. Hope you have a great day. Practice drawing, be great, be awesome. I'll see you next video.